I have to address the shirt. I was dressed as a fancy pants, like you dress normally, but then I realized that's not me. And so luckily, Ben Goodhart, who is a good person who you should all know, was nice enough to supply me with this punk rock safety shirt, which I am wearing. Thirdly, God has sort of given some direction as to what I should talk about. But in the spirit of punk rock safety, and to quote Rage Against the Machine, F you, I won't do what you tell me. I'm going to talk about what I want to talk about, which is doing safety too. So this actually, this sort of builds a little bit off of what Asher talked about earlier today, and some of what Todd talked about today. And the idea is not to say that like safety 2 is better or anything like that. It's kind of the idea of like, to kind of piggyback off of Asher, like we use these terms a lot. We should probably know what we're talking about, and we should probably know what it looks like to do it, or at least I'm going to give you my opinion of it. And so that's what the point is today. Like I want to accomplish two things. So number one, like when I talk about safety 2, here's what I mean. You may disagree with me, and that's fine. Yes? Sorry, I heard a voice behind me. And so I just needed to make sure it was a real person. It's, I just got to check on these things every once in a while. So that's number one. And then number two is one of the most common complaints I hear from people who are kind of interested in these ideas is, it's a great song, but how do you, can you dance to it? Is there something we can do with this? And so I want to talk about what are the things that I've done, right? So I've been kind of practicing what I would think of as safety 2 for a number of years now, probably close to a decade. So I want to talk about that. So does that seem reasonable? You don't really have a say in the matter. I was just mostly me getting some audience engagement. It's something you're supposed to do. I think I read that in a book. So this is a picture of a backup camera in one of my parents' cars I took from a number of years ago. And when you're a safety nerd for a while, you notice things that are like mundane and they become not mundane. You get like really interested in boring crap. And so I noticed at the bottom of the picture there, check surroundings for safety. And I thought that was the funniest thing I've ever seen in my life. Because like, what does that even mean? Like, is safety like hiding in one of those bushes back there and it's gonna like jump out and get me? Like it's a weird statement, like when you think about it. But it's actually a feature of language if you think about it, because language is something that we say stuff and we just assume that everyone knows what we mean, and the weird thing is we're usually right. And so in this case, for example, the designers of this system assumed that we would know that we're not like literally like look out for the safety professionals. Like look out for hitting stuff, right? That's kind of what they meant, right? But to me, it's an interesting sort of sentence because there's an assumption that we know what we mean when we say the word safety. And you could do this same exercise that I'm doing right now with any of the other terms we've heard thrown around today. Reliability, quality, health. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that we throw around, and we just assume that I'm going to use the term, and you're going to know what I mean, and we're going to be saying the same thing. And I'm not sure that's always true. And so that's interesting for me because I've been in safety for over 20 years, and at no point has there been an authoritative definition of safety. None. In fact, I was on the ANSI Z10 committee to make an occupational health and safety management system standard, and I advocated to get a definition of safety in there, and I was shot down, right? Like I was outvoted because that's too controversial to actually define what it is we do for a living, which is interesting. So I think it's worth having a conversation about it, though, because we want to know what we're doing, right? So this is where Eric Hallnagel, I think, really helped us out a little bit because he started an important conversation for us. And I won't go through the history too much because Asher did a pretty good job of that earlier. He started the conversation for us when he sort of delineated between different kinds of safety. Now, I don't want to get hung up on the labels and whatnot. We can certainly talk about that. If you have a question at any time, to raise your lightsaber, and we're happy to talk about it. But the idea here is I want to talk about what Eric Hallnagel conceptualized as safety 1 and safety 2. It's not to say that one's better than the other, but they are different, right? At least using this conceptualization. So safety 1 is making as few bad things happen as possible. That is safety 1. You're creating the conditions, the possibilities, the capacities so that as few bad things happen as possible. And so, kind of the conception is the picture, which is that of a poster that a friend of mine saw in a hardware store, one of those safety posters, and he thought it was really funny because it kind of implies that, hey, Ron, you do safety for a living, you don't do anything for a living. Which, okay, that's fair. But, obviously the implication from this poster is that safety, nothing happens. So we want nothing to happen, and when we have nothing, that means we're safe. That's the implication. Now, this is where the idea of zero comes from, and this is not a zero talk, but zero makes sense in a safety 2 space, at least in some way, shape, or form. But you don't even have to buy into zero to be in the safety 1 space. Right? Anytime we are looking at those things that lead to bad outcomes, and that is where our focus is, or anytime we are looking for things that we don't want and defining our practice around that, we are doing safety 1. That's safety 1 in a nutshell, right? Kind of makes sense if you think about it. Hey, I don't want these errors to happen. Let's figure out what's causing the errors and get rid of the errors, right? I don't want hazards in the workplace. Let's figure out where these hazards are coming from, get rid of the hazards. Let's minimize risk. These are all things we don't want, right? We're orienting ourselves around what we don't want, right? So, again, this could be a whole talk unto itself, but I really want to get to the more, okay, how do we implement this? But I figure we probably need to level set on what I'm talking about when I talk about doing safety 2, so that when I do start to talk about what I do and did, you probably know what I'm talking about. So that's safety 1. Safety 2, by contrast, that doesn't really turn out that well. Sorry about if the colors don't turn out very well. I'm not really good at slides. Anyway, so safety 2 is when we create the conditions to get as many good things as possible, right? So when we get the good stuff that we want, right? So good stuff could be finishing the job. Good stuff could be the project completes on time, under budget, all that fun stuff. We get as many good things as we want, right? Notice, though, that this is an event. This is something that does happen. So zero makes no sense in a safety 2 space. It makes zero sense, right? Because if there's zero, that actually is bad. You want more stuff in a safety 2 context, right? That's what we're focusing on. Now, importantly, what in my mind differentiates safety 1 and safety 2, kind of using Todd's point, are some basic principles. And the first principle, which is not talked about a lot, is this one called the principle of equivalence. This is something that Steve Schrock talks a lot about. So the principle of equivalence, this is a little bit theoretical, but this is critical in my mind, is the idea that the conditions in which failure and success emerge are the same. Failure and success emerge from the same underlying conditions, right? Now, again, we could have a whole session on this one alone, but if we buy into this concept, if we kind of think, I don't totally get it, Ron, but I'm with you, I'm kind of tracking. If we buy into this, this has huge implications, because this means that the things that lead to failure also lead to success, so eliminating them is not only maybe not the right approach in terms of effectiveness, it could be harmful. Like that's not overstating it. That is what that means. That's a logical implication from that statement. If that is true, then if we eliminate all error, we will eliminate the source of success. If we eliminate all variability, we eliminate the sources of success. That's what that means. Right? That doesn't mean that it maybe not a net positive. I'm not saying that. That's the implication there. Okay? If that's true, then, if we buy into this and we say, okay, if that's true, but we want good things to happen, we want not bad things to happen, right? Then how do we define safety? Well, in this space, then, getting rid of bad stuff doesn't make sense. Failure, where does failure come from? Failure doesn't come from one bad thing. It comes from when normal things come together in abnormal ways, right? And a cognitive systems engineering approach, we say you focus on helping people cope with complexity in the interaction between people, their environment, and their tools. And it's when those things get kind of mismatch or they get wonked up or something like that, that's when we have failure. It's not when one of those things breaks. It's when there's a mismatch between them. That's where the problems come in. And so if we create better matches between people, environments, and tools, then we get not only less failure, but more success. Therefore, our definition of safety is not eliminating failure, absence of accidents, absence of risk, et cetera, et cetera. It is the presence of the capacity to be successful. Now, note that last piece of it, though, even as conditions change. Because it's not like we're successful one time, therefore we achieve safety too. No, it's we want a capacity to be successful even as conditions change. And this has huge implications for how we practice safety, which again, I'm not going to go into the theoretical implications. I'll talk about some of the stuff that I've done, but that's the definition. This is the definition we use in a safety 2 space. Right? And that sort of implies, how do we improve safety? We improve safety not just by eliminating the bad stuff. We improve safety by helping people get work done, by helping people cope with the complexity of everyday work. One of the key fundamental things that should keep us up at night is our people are so good at dealing with the messiness of work that they make it look easy. They make it look easy, but it's not, right? It's not. We are so good at dealing with the messiness of work, we make our jobs look easier than they actually are. We do that. And if we do that, then probably our workers do that. Therefore, our job is to dive into the messiness of everyday work and find ways to support people. You with me so far? Does this make some sense? Does it not make sense to anybody? That would be a safety one way. Just kidding. Okay, so here's the bottom line, and then I'll get into some of the things that I've done, okay? Because the bottom line is anytime we are taking steps to increase the capacity for people to get work done, we are doing safety 2. Because I've had a lot of people be like, oh, I've read the book, Strong, this is great, I just want to know what do I do? How do I implement it? And like, this is it. Like, if you are helping people get work done successfully, even as conditions change, which implies anticipation and monitoring and other, sort of capacities, but if you're doing that, you're doing safety 2. Like, some of you probably just realized that there's some things you do that fall into that category and you didn't even know it. Which, totally, I agree with that. Like, some people, think it's, the ultimate, takedown of new views in safety 2. Well, they're not really new. Some people have been doing them for a while. Oh my God. I didn't even know that. Checkmate. No, of course, it would be stupid of us to believe that wouldn't be true. That would be insane. Like, if these didn't come out of nowhere, these emerged from our understanding of how work happens. So if people hadn't been doing it on their own somehow, that actually would be somewhat damning. Right? So some of you may be doing this already. However, there's probably some of you also who recognize that your version of safety doesn't necessarily jive with what this is. That's fine too. Like, I'm not here to be like the Puritanist, like this is safety, this is that's not safety 2. I'm just saying this is what Hallnagel talks about when he talks about safety 2. This is my understanding of safety 2. And when I implement safety 2, when I try to do safety 2, I do it based upon this conception. All right? But of course, all of this begs an important question. What do people need in order to get work done successfully? What does that mean? What does that look like in practice? Because I will tell you, 20 years in the safety industry, I got the degrees, I've got the certifications, I did all the stuff you're supposed to do. Nobody taught me how to do this. So I had to learn this myself. And if you're doing this, chances are you're the same. You either did it by accident or you taught yourself. Because if you think you've been taught this through normal safety education, I actually would be very skeptical of that because I've never seen it. I've not once ever seen it. So to me, this is actually simple but revolutionary in what we do. So let me give some examples. 4 examples of things, and we can go, each of these could be their own session, so ask questions, dive into details, but I'm just gonna give a high level for now. The first thing that I've done, and the first thing I recommend to people when they say, hey, I wanna go out and do safety too, what do I do? How do I get started? I go with this, get out and start learning about what it takes to get work done. Because to me, this is the essence of a sort of safety tune mindset, right? And the reason why is if people are so good at coping with complexity, they hide the things they're coping with, which is why we think that they're the reasons for failure, when the reality is the thing we're solving for is the complexity of work, not the erratic and fallible humans. That's not what we're solving for. We're solving for the complexity of work. If that's what's going on, then we have a fundamental misunderstanding of the complexities of work. We need to get out and understand it. We need to get out and know what's going on. So step 1, get out and understand work. And the great thing about this is it's something you can do today. I don't mean right now, because I'm not done talking. But like literally, like you can start to learn about this and appreciate this by just starting to observe what's going on around you. Right? There's this talk, in HRO theory in particular, about this mindfulness, organizational mindfulness. And mindfulness sounds like a fancy pants word. Sometimes, to Todd's point earlier, sometimes I think it's just another way of saying pay more attention. But I think at its best, when it's at its best, it really gets back to something a psychologist named Ellen Langer pointed out when she tells people about how to be more mindful, or managers how to be more mindful. It's not like pay more attention, it's go out and look for something you didn't notice before. And like, it's just that simple. Like, because I gotta be honest with you, we've probably walked into this room bunches of times. If you stop for a minute and look around, I bet you'll find a few things you didn't even notice before, some of which are maybe even interesting to you. If you start to observe the workers, and there are workers around us, right, and start to observe what they're doing and start to think, I wonder what makes their job hard. I bet you'll start to identify some of those pressures, some of those trade-offs that they have to deal with, that they're actively managing right now, like literally right now. When you're getting dinner tonight and you see the servers, what are they dealing with? What are the goal conflicts that they're having to work around right now? You'll start to see these things all around you. It's happening all around us all the time. We're just good at ignoring it for various reasons. But we can get better at not ignoring it. This is a skill we can learn. And so, for example, in organizations I've worked with, like literally when I was a consultant, I'm not a consultant anymore. I got out of that world because, I don't know, it gets boring after a while. But like, when I was a consultant, the clients would say, hey, how do we get started? I'd say, let's get out and start learning from work. And so one consultant organization I worked with, and I think I saw someone from the organization here earlier, one of the first things we did is we put it under the category of Gemba walks because they wanted to do that anyway. And I was like, hey, let's just call it that because you want to do it anyway. And we just trained some of their it was a construction company, so everybody in the job trailer, project managers, superintendents, project engineers, we trained everybody, 2 hours of quick training, what to look for, questions to ask. And then I went out with them and we just, hey, let's go out and observe some work, go talk to some workers. And they would watch me do it and watch me ask questions, and I'd say, okay, now you do it. And they would do it, and we'd talk about what they learned, and then they're like, yeah, okay, this makes sense. And they got excited, and they start building off of it, and they start doing it on their own. And then they start sharing stories. And then they start sharing those stories in their daily meetings. Like, hey, here's something I learned on my Gemba walk today. They're having some challenges over here in this area. Or this tool isn't working right. Or we got some trade stacking going on over here. Things that are not like rocket science stuff that is out there. But that's sort of the point. There's things that are out there all the time that are going to be really obvious if and when a failure occurs that we can find right now. Right? We can go out there and look right now. We don't have to wait. So, step 1, get out, start learning from work. There's lots more things we could talk about, but if you're just getting started, this is the place I would start. You don't have to even wait for your organization to do it. You can do it. Next time you go back to work, set aside some time. If you're near the job site, literally it takes 10 minutes. Like, just go out and observe and start asking yourself questions like, what makes this difficult? What are the goals that this person or this crew is managing right now? What are the resource constraints? Are there ever times when this, work would change and that would affect their ability to get work done because of weather, because someone's sick, because a different crew comes in, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you'll start to find some of these pressures, some of these challenges. Easy to do, no cost. Secondly, this is a good one, because I hear, safety too, but we still got to investigate accidents. Yeah, you do. Yeah, 100%, yeah, okay. I've investigated a lot of accidents using a safety 2 mindset. It's still doable. You can still do it. It's not hard. I do it all the time. Okay. But here's the difference. The difference is, and to me, I don't think this should just be a safety 2 mindset. This should just be a no-duh mindset. Like, how can you know what caused a failure if you don't know what's leading to success, what normal work looks like? Right? Now, there's an assumption in most accident investigation methods and techniques that we already know that, but we all know that that's just not true. Right? So step 1, understand how the work is normally done first and foremost. So, for example, when I do accident investigations, I will start, I don't ask about the incident at all. I just start with, okay, how does this work normally done? Let's start at the beginning. Usually at the beginning of the day, depends on the exact incident we're talking about. But okay, like a lockout tagout incident I investigated right before the pandemic started. Okay, let's go to the beginning. You come to work. How do you know what you're going to be working on that day? Talk to me about that. Oh, your work order system. Okay, let's dive into that. Right? And we just work our way through the process, asking questions, again, as Todd said, as others have said, to the people who actually do this work so that we can understand how the work's done. Just trying to understand, okay, how does this work vary? What are the challenges? What are the difficulties? What are the resource constraints that we have to deal with, that you have to deal with, worker, that you manage on a daily basis that could affect your ability to get this work done? And we keep moving forward in time until we get to the incident. And usually when I get to the incident, that's when I'll stop and say, okay, let's take stock. So I think this is about where the incident happened. Let's review what we've learned. So we have this, we have this, we have this, we have this, we have this. Okay? What don't we know about this incident that we haven't already talked about? And you know what's interesting? Often the answer is nothing. Often the answer is, wow, now that we've described the process as it normally happens, this incident looked inevitable. Not because of just you can't prevent all accidents, that's a different talk. Okay? Because the way the process is normally working on a long enough given timeline, given the variability that we just described in the system, it was going to happen eventually. So the incident didn't happen because of how things broke. The incident happened because normal things came together in an abnormal way. And so then the choice we have is, do we want to fix that, or do we want to change that? Do we want to change how things normally function rather than fix broken parts? That's the difference. So I can still investigate safety too, trying to increase the ability to be successful, but I'm focusing on how do people create success normally and how can I support that better, rather than what failed, what broke, how do I fix that? That's the difference. And again, I'm not saying one's better than the other, kind of back to, I think Asher said and others have said, it kind of depends on the situation, what you're looking at, right? Sometimes one approach may be better than the other, but they are fundamentally different, in my mind at least. Thirdly, this is another one. Oh, safety 2, you guys don't have rules and procedures anymore. We get rid of the rules and procedures in safety 2. No, we still have rules and procedures. Like the company I work for, I was involved in writing some of those rules and procedures. Right? So we do that. It's still a thing. It's still a thing that happens. We have rules. We have procedures. We have policies. The difference is in what we're trying to achieve. Because in my mind, and this is an oversimplification on my part, so forgive me, because this might stick up a few people's craw, if you will. Okay? In a safety 1 mindset, often we do rules and procedures to achieve compliance, to set a standard on what we want people to do, and so then when they know that what they need to do, they achieve it, and we can hold them accountable when they don't achieve it. But to me, I kind of take the approach of, well, if you think about it, like, How do people know what to do in any situation? Just like any situation. They have a script, right? They have a mental model, a schema. There's different terms that are kind of roughly the same. If we want to get academically, we could point at the differences. But the idea is we have an idea of what we should be doing moment to moment. I'm pretty sure I've been here all day. I don't remember very many times of someone saying, sit down and all face this direction. Right? Nobody told you to do that. How did you know how to do that? Well, you have a script. This is how you behave at a conference. This is what you do. Can you imagine how pissed off you'd be when Charles said, oh, it's time for our coffee break, if there was no coffee? Nobody told you there was coffee, but in a coffee break, if they don't have coffee and snacks, I'm sorry, I want my money back, right? That'd be insane. Where are we even living anymore, right? Why would we be upset? Because we have an expectation about how things are supposed to go, right? Your workers do too. They have an expectation about how work is supposed to go. And they use that expectation to help guide them on getting work done on a day-to-day basis. Rules and procedures should help inform that, but they can't be the only thing. They are one tool amongst many that people will use in order to help them know how to get work done on a daily basis. A common myth I hear people say, if we got rid of all rules and procedures, it would be anarchy. No, it wouldn't. It just wouldn't, right? People don't work that way. When we get rid of all rules and procedures, people create their own. We just don't like them, right? We're just not fans of that when that happens, but that's how it happens, right? People are naturally going to create some sense of order in their lives, right? So why not inform that? Why not work with the pre-existing sense of how work should happen rather than create a whole new one and try to break down the old one? Because you know what? The one that exists already probably is based more on the realities of the work environment than your one that you created separate from the work. And so when we create rules and procedures, one of the things we do is, number one, involve the people who do the work, but number two, understand that even that's not good enough, because our just way of thinking about work in general, work is imagined versus work is done, is not a product of managers being stupid. It is a product of work being complex. Right? So all procedures, no matter who writes them, will be incomplete. All of them. 100%. There's no perfect procedure. Sorry. Okay? That's just the way the world works. Okay? And so as a result, we, number one, have people help us write the procedures, but number two, we need processes to help people beyond the procedures in that moment to moment, knowing how to behave, how to act, where to zig, where to zag, and then, as Todd talked about, and I'm sure as others will talk about, building in the capacities for when they zig or zag the wrong way. We don't kill anybody, right? These things have to happen. That's just, again, we are helping people navigate complexity, because in a Safety 2 space, we're solving for the complexity of work, not the fallibility of humans. Our rationality is bounded not because we're dumb, but because there are limits to experience. This is how we base and know how to act moment to moment, based on our experience, but our experience is always limited. And that's not because of us, that's just because of reality, that's life. So we want to build in you can almost think of it like a procedure system or a work system, right? Or her first name's missing. I think it's Lucy Suckman, right? Who said we want to build a workscape that informs people, that helps them know what matters in that moment, so that they can act appropriately. Because one of the things we find in psychology consistently is when you give people good information in an environment that is aligned with their goals, and last I checked, safety is kind of a goal everybody wants, you can trust them to do the right thing. I don't have to control. It's only when there's misalignment there that we start to have problems. So in our role, in the organization I'm working with and in organizations I've worked with, we try to spend a lot of time not just crafting good procedures that we think are going to keep people safe, but procedures that inform work, that help build expectations, that help build predictability, build common ground between us and them, between them and their coworkers, between them and their environment. Again, it's about relationships. It's not about individuals or about broken things. Lastly, and this is another big one. Oh, what do we measure? What do we measure? We need this. We need to measure. Okay. Spoiler alert, I don't have the silver bullet here. Okay. But I can talk about some of the things that I've wrestled with, that we are currently wrestling with. The key thing is we measure safety by our ability to facilitate success. Right? What are the things that we need in order to be successful? Now, there's two things that I think are interesting that I've either done or we're currently working on right now in the organization I'm working with, that I think would be interesting to some of you. Okay? So number one, and I know a lot of you have heard this idea before, we shift the idea from measurement or metrics to monitoring. Because that's really what we're going for, right? Like the thing I always think about, like everyone's, oh, we're a data-driven organization. Bull. Yeah, I'm sorry, that's just not true, okay? You're not. That's not how human cognition works, right? You are evidence-driven, and what you consider to be evidence is actually informed by your expectations about how the world works. So if we just gave you a bunch of data, you wouldn't be like, aha, I have figured it out, right? You'd just say, oh, that data is meaningless, which it implies that you already know what's important and what's not, right? So one of the things I think about is, okay, what information do I need to present to leaders at different levels, and maybe sometimes even to our workers, to be informative to them, to help them ask good questions about the work environment. It's not about helping them know how we're doing. They think they want to know that, but they really don't. Because really what they want to know is, what do I need to do next? Like, that's really what our data and our metrics and all the things are trying to do, is help people know, what do I need to do next? What's the next thing that we need to be focused on? Is it fine and I can just go back to doing whatever I was doing? Or is it bad and I need to intervene? Or is it there's a good opportunity and I need to intervene? Right? That's what we're really going for. Right? So to me, once I started to think that way, then I said, okay, well, what sort of drives action? Well, stories. And there's going to be a lot of sessions, I think just even this afternoon, about storytelling that I would encourage you to go to, because it's a fascinating topic and it's so important. But one of the things we did in one organization I worked with is we decided, you know what, one tool that the organization is using to measure whether its sites are safe or not is a safety assessment. What if we tweaked that? What if we changed that, and instead of doing like, your typical check the box safety assessment, what if we went out and gathered stories about how the work is happening? And then people are like, yeah, that's great, but like, what do we have to like compare it to? And I said, yeah, I know, in comparison, we need some idea of good, like what are we trying to achieve? And so one of the things we looked for is what does good look like in that organization? How do they define good? One of the things they had was they had success factors for job sites. Things that they believed, if we do these things, this is what is going to make our job sites successful. So we said, what if we went and gathered stories about those things? And said, hey, tell me a time when you had to deal with a contract issue. I said that weird, contract issue. I'm just going to go with it. I like it. It sounds fancier. No, tell me about a time when you had you had an issue with one of your subcontractors and you had to manage that. Tell me about a time when you were at a job site and the leadership you thought was poor. Right? What did you do? How'd you manage that? And we started to uncover these stories about people adapting, about people figuring stuff out. Some stories were quite good. We figured out there was one job site where they had a scheduling system that everybody loved. The organization was trying it out, and they weren't sure if it was working, but like literally everyone was like, if it wasn't for that schedule system, we would be in bad shape, right? And so it was like, wow, this is great. Now we have some evidence to back that up that we can then use to move this to other sites. And then there was another one where they were starting to talk about how, man, the leadership at this job site is great. We have great communication here. All those leaders were leaving, right? We found sources of resilience and we found sources of brittleness. And so this enabled us to know, what do we do next? How do we get more of the good stuff and ensure that we get as much of the stuff we don't want? How do we get more success? How do we help people cope with the complexity of getting this work done? And so even though it was tough for the organization to know, okay, how are we doing by this assessment, it was able to know what to do in order to get more of what it wanted. And at the end of the day, the leaders were like, yeah, this is kind of more what we want. This is more what we want to do, because we want to be supportive of our job sites. We don't want to just be up there judging from afar. And so that was an interesting tool that they kind of took and are kind of still doing today. One other piece of this, because again, some of you are like, well, that's great, Ron, but I need something to show my bosses. I need the metrics. And there is no silver bullet on this. I'm going to warn you in advance, and there's lots of reasons why there's no silver bullet on this, not the least of which is a metric by definition takes a complex situation and strips it all down into one variable, which when you do that, you are maximizing downside. Right? So there's always going to be maximum downsides, which is, to be honest, why I kind of shrug my shoulders with the measurement question most of the time, because to me, the most important question isn't really the metric, it's what do you do with it? Like, how do you talk about it? Who talks about it? And where does it go? That's really the most important question. The number itself is somewhat meaningless most of the time, because the number is not really indicative of much. But something we're experimenting with in our organization right now, it's not ready for prime time, otherwise I'd show you. But we're, learning is a kind of a common theme. I mean, it's in the friggin' name. We said, well, what if we went and tried to identify our capacity to learn? Like, measuring learning is hard, and it's hard for various reasons, not the least of which is it can vary, like learning here doesn't necessarily apply over there. It could, but it doesn't necessarily, right? But what if we just looked at, okay, what are the things that if we were doing learning, like if we were going to make ourselves poised to learn, like have the ability to learn when an opportunity to learn arises, what would we need? And so something we found, this is actually in the innovation research literature that I just happened upon. It's a concept called absorptive capacity. The word is weird, absorptive, like it's like absorption, right? So we're changing the word to learning capacity because absorptive is hard to say. I'll probably end up saying it in some fancy way eventually because I'm not good at talking. So absorptive capacity is the ability of an organization to take advantage of new knowledge. That's the definition. And there's actually a literature on this. Now, in the absorptive capacity literature, they're mainly focused externally to the organization. How does an organization look outside of itself, find new technologies, new markets, and identify those quickly to be able to take advantage, to get a market advantage? Seems like an interesting concept, right? It makes sense, right? But what if we could take, hey, these are some things that help organizations learn. Maybe we could utilize that for internal learning. Like for example, if we just did a mental experiment and talked about people coping with complexity, right, to get work done. What if we saw that as an act of innovation rather than as a deviation? Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying all innovations are great. I mean, I don't know. It's probably going to be amazing. I'm sure, they're brilliant. They're way smarter than me. But that little vision goggle thing, I don't know. The Apple thing, I'm not crazy about it. It looks weird. Can you imagine just going around with goggles? Hopefully you know what I'm talking about. Otherwise you're like, who is this? Is he having a stroke? Is he okay? Okay. If you know what I'm talking about, look it up. I don't get it. Maybe that's me getting old. But anyways, so there's some innovation that's less than great, right? Not all innovations lead to big money, right? And if we take that same mindset, every act of work is an act of innovation, how does the organization identify that knowledge and take advantage of it? That's interesting. Because that implies, number one, we need the ability to acquire the knowledge. And these terms I'm using are actually from the absorptive capacity literature. You need the ability to acquire it. So we would need some tools. We need methods. We need some competence or skills in order to do that. Well, yeah, these are things I think we could actually point to. We could actually say, yes, this is happening. That almost sounds measurable. We need the ability to to assimilate the knowledge is the term they use. And what they mean by that is to turn the data into meaning, or to use kind of a term that Dave Woods likes to use a lot, which I think really it makes a lot of sense, identify patterns. Right? So I look at one instance of work, and I see someone doing something. What is that something? Oh, well, that's someone adapting because of a goal conflict. Interesting. There's a pattern here. Because I see that also over here, and over here, and over here. Oh my gosh, it's almost like there's maybe a trend. Right? We're starting to see people doing things. And so, do we have the capacity to do that? So when we get information, does it just go into a database that gets locked away? Or do we have a process in place that has the right people looking at the right data at the right time? That's something we can manage. Thirdly, we need the ability to transform the patterns to action. What do we do with that? And so if I see a bunch of goal conflicts in an area that people are having difficulty managing, or pressures that are sort of starting to overwhelm our capacity, what do I do with that? Well, I need something. I need some ability to take otherwise it's just random information. Right? And this is, actually in the absorptive capacity literature, the movement from assimilation to transformation is the movement from potential capacity to realized capacity. We need the ability to do something. So do we have the processes to identify improvement opportunities and to then do something with them, which leads to the last point, exploitation is what they say. And, okay, are we actually implementing these things? And are we identifying the unintended consequences for the interventions that we have put in place? Because yesterday's solutions are today's problems, right? So for us, these are things that we are looking at and exploring. How could we start to turn this into a monitoring metric, if you will, right? It may not end up being a number. I don't know yet. We're playing around with different ideas. But to us, this is more interesting because this is more predictive of our ability to be successful in the future if we are better at identifying, learning, and taking advantage of it. We are going to be a much better organization. We're going to be more resilient, probably safer by almost any definition of safety, more reliable by almost any definition of reliability. Right? We are going to have more capacity overall. And so to me, that is a way of looking at measurement from a safety 2 perspective. And again, it may not be a metric. It may not be a dashboard. We're hoping it is because, I mean, everybody wants that, right? That's like, if we do that, like, I'll be back. I'll be a big, like, Ron, the super duper consultant, you know, like, yeah, you'll have my t-shirts. Right. But to me, this is the essence of doing safety 2. Right, so I'll sum this up, I'll shut up, and then, you know, if you have questions, happy to answer them. If you don't have questions, we can take a quick break before the breakout sessions here. But the idea here, again, I hope you see the through line here is we are looking very intently, how are we extracting information from the work environment about what is making work difficult, what is making work challenging, what are people dealing with, what are the dilemmas, what are the trade-offs, what are the pressures, and, okay, how can I support them? How can I help them? How can I bring new capacities to bear in order to make them more successful, even as things change? Right? Well, shoot, man, that also implies how can I look into the future to start to anticipate challenges and then bring new capacities to bear for that? To me, that's the essence of safety 2. So with that, I will shut up. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. Throw up that lightsaber. Otherwise, it's about Miller time, I think. It's not Miller time yet. I wouldn't drink before the next session, but you could. I'm not going to tell you your business.
Brian.
The Brian. You'll be quick.
I promise.
That was like the 4th lie you told today.
I love this.
Speak into the box.
I want to say that I loved it. It was so great. I do have just one, I don't know if it's a question or it's a point, right? But so the last thing that you're talking about here is learning, organizations that learn, and that real life brings variation, ups and downs, and all of that. And that a lot of times safety, we're looking at the downside of risk, right? The downside and hedging against the downside and completely ignoring the upside of risk. And that if we learn to learn through variation, learn to learn where we're seeing the variation on the shop floor, out on the work, where the work is taking place, that you could actually innovate new ideas as well as hedge against the downside of risk. And then I'll toss it back to you.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I like that a lot. To me, and you brought up actually what triggered a thought, because one of the other big misconceptions I see with Safety 2 is all about just learning from success so that we can pat people on the back because they're doing a good job. And that's not at all what this is about. The idea of Safety 2 is based on that principle of equivalence, right? Success and failure come from the same underlying conditions. Therefore, we learn from success, not just to pat people on the back, but because there is a downside, upside risk in all work. Every instance of work has the seeds of the next failure. Every single one. It's in there. You just got to look, right? And I'm not saying it's always easy. It's there, though. So, yeah. Yes, sir.
So I really liked your stories of adaptation concept and how that enables you to figure out what you do next. I guess my question is, how do you kind of escalate that up and then communicate it back down? Like, what's that flow path look like, and how do you communicate it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the idea is, if I'm understanding the question right, so when we identify a story about, hey, here's an instance of work happening, here's the challenges, we identify some of the patterns, we maybe come up with some opportunities for improvement. We want to tell that story up, but then we also want to have some lessons learned down. So one of the things that I recommend you think about a lot is that doesn't have to be one product, right? So we often think, I'm going to make one lessons learned template and it's got to work for everybody. That's not necessarily the case. Sometimes it makes sense to have, okay, we're going to have something that's, again, the point of presenting something, information to someone is to be informative. So what is informative to my upper management may not be very informative to, like in my particular situation, I deal with our upper management, our customer, our general contractor, and then the frontline workforce. And these are three very different people, very different people with very different needs about what they're looking for in terms of being informed about how we're doing, what do they do next, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the questions, and I'm pointing kind of in the rough direction of my team, which you have no idea about. Like, you're like, why is it? Like, what's happening over there, Ron? Are you okay? No, my team's over there. And one of the things we often push each other back on is like, okay, what do they need to know? Like, what is it? What are they looking for? What's interesting to them? Right? So I would ask those kinds of questions anytime you're going to present something to someone. Like, what are the things that they are, what's their contribution to helping us deal with the complexity of this system? And how can I present this information in a way that facilitates that process, that sense-making process? And you may find that, yeah, there's something that's going to work for a few of these stakeholders, but you may also find that, you know what, that's not going to work for them. Let's do something different for these people. So be open to that would be my suggestion. I don't know if that answers your question. Ish? Okay. The other thing I would say is if I'm because the other part of it that I didn't touch on is how the whole thing flows. Is that kind of what you mean? Okay. So which is a fuzzy word, right? So to me, that's part of that's part of the conversation we're having in terms of absorptive capacity. Like, not just how we identify information, how we turn it into patterns, how we turn it into action, but how are we communicating what we are learning at different levels of the organization, right? And what are those vehicles? What are those pathways? I'm biased towards let's use existing pathways, right? So we've already kind of gone through, we called it our communication audit of and it's not really an audit, it's just identifying, okay, what are the things that we have available to us that we could communicate through? And then what are the different things that people use those things for? And how could I leverage those things for various types of information? So if I have a story I want to tell, that wouldn't work in that meeting, but it would work great over here. You know what I mean? So I think something like that helps you understand what's available to you. And you may find that, I've not run into this, but you may find, hey, I've got nothing, so I need to create something new. I need a new meeting for that, or I need a new email, newsletter, or whatever. I don't know. Does that answer your question more? Okay, perfect. Thank you. I have 10 seconds.
5.
I like that we're
4.
ending it in silence. Actually, I was going to see if we could go the whole 10. You killed it, Charles.
Thank you, Ron Gantt.
Thank you.